Hello and welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. I am Anushri Nagpal from the Department of Geography, Jamia Millia Islamia. In this episode, we will learn about watershed management, which comes under the paper Geomorphology. Learning objectives of this episode are: number 1, learning about watershed, its meaning and concept; number 2, watershed and open system; 3, watershed, its characteristics; 4th, the input and output balance of a watershed; 5, watershed management and its practices; and 6th, watershed instrumentation for monitoring; 7th, history of watershed management in India. Introduction. Definition. Watershed is a natural geomorphic unit. It may be defined as the area which contributes water to a particular stream or sets of streams. Defined by topographic divides, it is an area of land which drains water, sediment, and dissolves material to a common outlet. Thus, watershed is an area that drains surface water to a common outlet. Watershed provides opportunity to estimate the amount of erosion because measurement of river flow, and by knowing the area of watershed and by assuming a diversity of material, rate of land erosion over the whole catchment may be deducted. Watershed is a limited, convenient, and usually clearly defined and unambiguous topographic unit available in a nested hierarchy of sizes on the basis of stream ordering. It provides the best way to measure precipitation and solar radiation's output and outputs of discharge. Watershed is ecologically and geomorphologically a relevant management unit, and its analysis provides a practical analytical framework for spatially explicit, process-oriented scientific assessment that provides information useful to guiding management decisions. Watershed nomenclature. The nomenclature related with watershed are diagrammatically illustrated in Figure 1. The boundary between two watersheds is referred to as a watershed boundary or water divide. The watershed area is normally defined as the total area flowing into a given outlet or pour point or mouth of the watershed, as shown in Figure 1. The pour point is the point at which water flows out of a watershed. This is the lowest point along the boundary of a watershed. The cell in the water raster is used on the pour point about which the contributing area is determined. The source cell may be a feature such as a stream gauging station, dam site, or water mouth for which characteristics of the contributing area is determined. Watershed has stream or network of streams of different orders having specific flow directions. The confluence of two streams is known as stream junction. Other dimensions of watershed are: it has length, width, perimeter, and area, like has been shown in Figure 1. Watershed delineation. Delineation of watershed is the first step to proceed further on integrated watershed modeling and management. There are two ways of watershed delineation. These are the traditional way through topographic sheets and automated watershed delineation using the GIS technology. The traditional way. The traditional way of watershed delineation is delineating watershed boundary through topographic sheets. Through this method, watershed boundary is drawn manually on a topographic map using patterns of contours shown in Figure 2a. Delineation of watershed or the total runoff contributory area to a part depends on the watershed drainage pattern. The person who draws the boundary uses topographic features on the map to determine where a divide is located. For watershed delineation at 1:25,000 scale, maps are suitable, and the boundary for a particular watershed drawn as a line which surrounds all the drainage lines and depressions in the watershed and passes through the highest points between the stream and adjacent one. Automated watershed delineation. Today, GIS software are used to delineate watershed boundary automatically through computer. Through this technique, one can generate watershed boundary in a fraction of time. Watershed boundary through computer is determined by using digital elevation model or DEM as data input. A stream network can be derived from the DEM. From DEM, there are two ways for watershed delineation. These are point-based and watershed area-wide. Point-based watershed. From the dam-based stream network, delineation of individual watersheds can be done based on point of interest such as a gauging site, dam site or watershed mouth. Using these points as pore points, area of individual watershed may be delineated as shown in figure 3. Area-wide watersheds. The area-wide watershed for each stream section is delineated by selecting threshold values in terms of area or cells. A large threshold value will have less but larger watersheds. Figure 4 illustrates the determination of area-wide watershed delineation at different threshold values. The derivation is based on a threshold accumulation value in terms of area, that is 500 hectares shown in figure 4 or 50 hectares shown in figure 4. Let us now learn about watershed and open system. The famous geomorphologist W.M. Davis treated the river like the vein of leaf. Broadly viewed, it is like entire leaf. Like a leaf, watershed is an open system as shown in figure 2. Closed systems are those which possess clearly defined boundaries across which no import or export of materials or energy takes place. The open system requires a continuing energy supply and is the effect maintained by constant supply and removal of energy. The watershed is an excellent example of geomorphological system. Energy inputs and outputs of watershed. The watershed has energy inputs to regulate its system. Therefore, the watershed can be envisaged and receiving energy or input from the climate over the watershed surface, and it loses energy or output through the water discharge, sediment and mineral flow through watershed mouth, and evaporation and transpiration from its surface. The endogenic forces below the watershed surface are the second source of energy input of the watershed. The endogenic forces are basically responsible for developing initial form of a watershed. On the initial landform, various kinds of denudational processes originated by climatic energy, that is rainfall and temperature. The landforms are developed in watersheds of different forms and characteristics. The energy is transformed from one watershed system to another through hydrological and denudation processes from its common outlet, that is the mouth, or through its surface, shown in figure 5. The environment, ecology and the form of the watershed is a function of all these energy inputs and watershed responses, that is the outputs. Let us now learn about watershed characteristics. The energy provided by the climate is regularized within the watershed system, which is controlled by watershed characteristics, that is geology, soils, relief morphometry, drainage morphometry, morphology and vegetation, etc. Geological variability in the watershed causes different rates of discharge and silt delivery. Under identical rain inputs, the different rock units of the watershed may produce water discharge and silt delivery at different rates. Soil depth and texture have direct influence on rainwater infiltration, soil moisture storage and groundwater recharge. The relief morphometric parameters such as altitudinal zones shown in figure 6, slope and aspect play an important role in controlling both hydrological and denudational processes. The aspect plays very important role in the distribution of temperature. The drainage morphometric parameters, drainage density, stream frequency, bifurcation ratio, drainage texture, watershed shape, stream order and watershed size play significant role in controlling various watershed processes. Watersheds having high drainage density, stream frequency, bifurcation ratio and drainage texture are subject to high overland flow, low infiltration, low water balance and high rates of denudation. The shape of the watershed influences the time taken for water from the remote part of the watershed to arrive at the outlet. Thus, the occurrence of the peak and the shape of the hydrograph are affected by the watershed shape. stream ordering shown in figure 7, watershed size and hierarchy shown in figure 8 also play a significant role in regularization of climatic energy inputs within the watershed. Morphologically, a watershed is constituted of three major zones, that is, the crest zone, the mid-crest zone and the valley zone. These are also known as upland area, midland area and the lowland area. These morphological zones are characterized by different natural landforms of different genetics, that is, pluvial, fluvial, etc., depending upon the location of the watershed. Vegetation has direct control on hydrological processes such as interception loss, infiltration, overland flow, rain splash erosion, sheet wash erosion and mass wasting processes. In view of the significant controlling roles, it is necessary to study in detail about the watershed characteristics for wise management of watersheds. Let us now learn about the watershed input and output balance. The environment and form of a watershed is function of interactions of watershed input parameters like climate and tectonic processes with watershed characteristics like geology, soils, morphometry, morphology, vegetation, etc. Balance or equilibrium between input and output parameters of a watershed means no environmental deterioration, pollution or healthy environment. An equilibrium state is one in which the many parameters of a watershed system are dynamically balanced. When the entire watershed remains in physical balance, nutrients like water and soils are detained longer within the watershed. The soil build and retain more moisture, further retaining water and simultaneously encouraging life. The built-up soils have increased nutrient storage sites and the biogeochemical cycle looks more, keeping the chemicals as richer, lingering life. In a balanced watershed system, a hill slope profile is product of a balance between runoff, infiltration and erosion. All of these are modified by the degree of soil developed, since that in turn controls that grows on hillside and thus controls runoff, infiltration and erosion. In disequilibrium state of watershed, runoff intensity usually increases, thus causing erosion on hill slopes. Simultaneously, flood waters reach water courses faster due to denser and more effective integration of ephemeral channels on the hill slopes, and flood heights increase coupled with increased sedimentation. Increased sedimentation and increased flooding lead to increased lateral erosion of stream channels that must change their channel geometry to accommodate a greater percentage of sediment load to water discharge. Under such disequilibrium state, a headwater anthropogenic change can effect a change in the shape of the whole watershed below it. Watershed management, objective and approach. The broad objective of watershed management is promotion of the overall economic well-being and the social improvement of the people within watershed along with maintenance of the watershed. The focus of the watershed management activities is the enhancement of the viability and quality of rural livelihood support systems. To achieve these objectives and fulfill the focus of watershed management, the watershed managers should be well aware about the watershed characteristics, watershed input and output variables, and about the status of watershed input and output interactions. Managing the watershed means healing the wounds and treatment of various types of land diseases and improvement of the quality of the inhabitants. Before starting treatment, that is the management of a disease, operation research is needed to find out its causes and effects in the entire system. Then only the disease can be rooted out from the entire system. To ensure the best use of the resources in watershed, the approach of watershed management should be A. Preventive, that is to control the deterioration of existing relationships between the use of natural resources within the system, and B. Restorative, that is for restoring sustainable relationship which has been destroyed due to actions in the past. For this purpose, various watershed management practices are used which are described in brief in the following paragraphs. We will now learn about the watershed management practices. For wise management of watershed, massive soil and water conservation treatment practices are required. Morgan has suggested various soil and water conservation practices which are divisible into three major groups. These are related to soil management practices, crop management practices, and soil erosion control measures. A brief account of these practices and measures based on Morgan is presented in the following paragraphs. First, soil management. The soil management practices aim to maintain the fertility and structure of the soil. The fertile soils not only give good yield, they also minimize the erosive effects of raindrops, runoff, and wind. Soil fertility thus also seen as the key to soil conservation. The various soil management practices also used so far in different areas can be divided into three groups. These are using organic matter and various tillage practices. Organic content. Use of organic materials improves the cohesiveness of the soil, increases its water retention capacity, and promotes a stable aggregate structure. The major organic materials which may be added are green manures, straw, or as a manure which has already undergone a high degree of fermentation. The green manures have high rate of fermentation and yield a rapid increase in soil fertility. Straw decomposes less rapidly and so takes longer to affect the soil stability. Tillage practices. Tillage is an important soil management technique. The standard tillage operations maintain soil fertility and retain their stability. Tillage provides a suitable seed bed for plant growth and helps to control weeds. The tillage practices which are used for soil management may be divided into two different types. These are conventional tillage and conservation tillage. Conventional tillage. Plows made of wood being used over the years is the traditional implement of tillage. Plows invert the plow furrow and lift and move all soil in plow layer, usually to a depth of 15 to 30 centimeter. Disc cultivator is another traditional equipment for tillage. With disc cultivators, the soil is broken up by the passage of saucer-shaped metal discs mounted on axles. Conservation tillage. For all types of soil, the conventional practices are not used. For example, fine sandy soils, very heavy sticky soils, and on structure-less soils. On fine sandy soils, particularly when dry, conventional tillage practices tend to produce a large number of failure planes, pulverize the soil near the surface, and create a compacted layer at plow depth which reduces infiltration and results in increased runoff. The soil is then rapidly eroded by water and on drying into a fine dust also by wind. Thus, while tillage can improve the coarse structures on heavy soils, it can destroy the structure on non-cohesive soils. Under such soils, to overcome these problems, tillage operations are restricted either by cutting down on their number by carrying out as many operations as possible in one pass, as with mulch tillage and minimum tillage, or by concentrating them only on the rows where the plants grow and leaving the inter-row areas untilled, as with strip zone tillage. Crop management. Plant itself play a significant role in reducing soil erosion. Because of differences in their density and morphology, plants differ in their effectiveness in protecting the soil from erosion. In designing soil conservation strategy based on agronomic measures, raw crops must be combined with protective, effective crops in a logical cropping pattern. The agronomic measures for soil conservation are based on the role of plant cover in reducing erosion by various practices such as by crop rotation, crop cover, strip cropping, multiple cropping, high density planting, and mulching. Rotation. The simplest way to combine different crops is to grow them consecutively in rotation. The frequency with which raw crops are grown depends on the severity of erosion. In low erosion areas, they may be grown every other year. But in the erodible areas, they must be grown only in 5 or 7 years. Suitable crop for uses in rotation are legumes and grasses. These provide good ground cover, help to maintain or even improve the organic status of the soil, thereby contributing to soil fertility and enable a more stable aggregate structure to develop in the soil. Cover crops. Cover crops are grown as a conservation measure either during the off-season or as ground protection under trees. They are grown as winter annuals and after harvest are plowed in the form of green manure. Ground cover are grown under the tree crops to protect the soil from the impact of water drops falling from the canopy. Strip cropping. Under strip cropping, raw crops and protection effective crops are grown in alternating strips aligned on the contour or perpendicular to the wind. Erosion is largely limited to the row crop strips, and soil removed from these is trapped in the next strip downslope or downwind, which is generally planted with a leguminous or grass crop. This practice of soil management is best suited to well-drained soils because the reduction in runoff velocity, if combined with a low rate of infiltration on a poorly drained soil, can result in waterlogging. Multiple cropping. The multiple cropping practice involves either sequential cropping, growing 2 or more crops in a year in a sequence, or intercropping, growing 2 or more crops on the same piece of land at the same time. The purpose of this practice is to increase the production from the land while providing protection to the soil from erosion. High density planting. By increasing the density of the plants, the intensity of soil erosion can be mitigated. This practice is used to obtain the same effect for a monoculture crop that multiple cropping achieves with 2 or more crops. The high density planting increases infiltration capacity of soil and controls overland flow. Consequently, erosion is controlled. Mulching. To protect the soil from rain splash and sheet wash erosion, mulching practice is used. Mulching is the covering of soil with crop residues such as straw, maize stalk, palm fronds, etc. Such cover controls raindrop impact and reduces the velocity of runoff and wind. Mulching also reduces soil temperatures and increases soil moisture. This practice is very useful for semi-humid tropical areas to increase the yield of coffee, banana and cocoa. Revegetation. To control process of erosion on landslides, rilling, gullied, road and other construction sites, land dunes and mine spoil areas, vegetation plays a significant role. Revegetation is also necessary in the deforested areas and in areas cleared by patch cutting. Various methods and measures are described by Morgan for restoring of gullied land, restoring of landslide scars and restoring of pastures. Agroforestry. To control soil erosion, land which is not suitable for agriculture such as along the river banks, on terraces and contour bunds, on areas being revegetated to control erosion as windbreaks, and shade trees may be used for planting within a farming system. Soil erosion control. Mechanical field practices are used to control the movement of water and wind over the soil surface. Studies have suggested several mechanical techniques to reduce the velocity of runoff and wind, increases the surface and groundwater storage capacity, or safely dispose the excess water. Some of such important mechanical measures are contouring, contour bunds, terraces, waterways, stabilization structures, windbreaks and geotextile. Contouring. Carrying out plowing, planting and cultivation on the contour can reduce soil loss down to 50% compared with cultivating the sloping land and down the slopes. The effectiveness of contour farming varies with slope steepness and slope length, for it is inadequate as a soil conservation measure for lengths greater than 180 meters at 10 steepness. Contour bunds. Contour bunds are earth banks of 1.5 to 2 meters wide, built across the slope to act as a barrier to runoff from a water storage area on their upslope side and to break up a wind slope into segments shorter in length than is required to generate overland flow. Terraces. Terraces are earth embankment constructed across the slope to intercept surface runoff and convey it to a stable outlet at a non-erosive velocity and to a shortened slope length. These terraces can be classified into 3 main types: diversion terraces, retention terraces and bench terraces. Diversion terraces intercept overland flow and channel it across the slope to suitable outlet. Retention terraces are used where it is necessary to conserve water by storing it on the hillside. Bench terraces consist of a series of alternating shelves and risers and are employed where steep slope up to 300 meters need to be cultivated. Waterways. The purpose of waterways in a conservation system is to convey runoff at a non-erosive capacity to a suitable disposal place. Normally, its dimension must provide sufficient capacity to confine the peak runoff from a storm with a 10-year return period. 3 types of waterways can be incorporated in a complete water disposal system. These are diversion channels, terrace channels, and grass waterways. Stabilization structures. For gully reclamation and gully erosion control, stabilization structures play an important role. Small dams, usually 0.5 to 2 meters in height, made from locally available materials such as earth, wooden plank, brushwood, or loose rock, are built across gullies to trap sediment and thereby reduce channel depth and slope. Windbreaks. To control the erosive winds, shelter belts placed at right angle are very useful to reduce wind velocity. The shelter belts are spaced at regular intervals to break up the length of open wind blow. Inert structures such as stone walls, salt and brushes fences, and cloth screens can be used to perform similar functions on a smaller scale. A shelter belt is designed so that it rises sharply on the windward side and provides both a barrier and a filter to wind movement. Geotextile. Several types of netting woven from natural fibers such as jute or made from artificial fibers such as nylon are used in erosive control. They are supplied in rolls, unrolled over the hill slopes from the top and anchored with large pins or stapled. They are designed to give temporary stability on roadsides and on steep slopes, not used for agriculture until such time as the vegetation cover grows. Watershed instrumentation for monitoring. Because watershed provides opportunity to estimate the amount of erosion and water balance through measurements hydrometeorological parameters, and by knowing the area of the watershed and by assuming a diversity of material, rate of land erosion and water balance over the whole watershed may be deducted before watershed treatment, during watershed treatment, and after watershed treatments. Therefore, to define the responses of various management activities in the watershed, watershed instrumentation is an essential part of watershed management. For this purpose, 2 permanent monitoring stations within the watershed are needed. First, to monitor watershed responses or outputs, that is, water discharge and sediment and solute flow, a hydrological station at the mouth of the watershed, and second, to monitor climatic input parameters, that is, rainfall, temperature, evaporation, wind velocity, etc. A meteorological station within the same watershed, like shown in figure 9, is required. History of watershed management in India. Watershed management projects has been launched by the Government of India from the early 1970s onwards. Different watershed management programs like the DPAP, that is the Drought Prone Area Program, the DDP, Desert Development Program, RVP, River Valley Project, NWOPRA, that is Nainital Watershed Development Project for rain-fed areas, and IWDP, that is Integrated Watershed Development Program, were launched subsequently in various environmental regions. These were consistently being affected by water stress and drought-like situation. During mid-1980s and early 1990s, emphasis was given to the Integrated Watershed Development Program with participatory approach. This approach had focused on rising crop productivity and livelihood improvement in watersheds. In 1974, Government of India constituted a committee under the chairmanship of Professor C.H. Hanumantha Rao. This committee recommended new guidelines in 1975, which emphasized on collective action and community participation, including participation of primary stakeholders through community-based organizations, non-government organizations, and Panchayati Raj institutions. The watershed development programs were reviewed and revised again in 2001 and developed guidelines known as Haryali Guidelines to make further simplification and involvement of PRIs more meaningful in planning, implementation, evaluation and community improvement. In the year 2005, the Hiranchal Committee evaluated the entire government-sponsored NGO and donor-implemented watershed development programs in India and suggested a shift in focus away from a purely engineering and structural focus to a deepest concern with livelihood issues. The major objectives of the watershed management program are conservation, upgradation and utilization of natural endowments such as land, water, plant, animals and human resources in a harmonious and integrated manner with low cost, simple, effective and replicable technology. Generation of massive employment, reduction of inequalities between irrigated and rain-fed areas and poverty alleviation. Thank you.